The small town had its quiet rhythm, where everyone knew each other's routines and the streets carried the familiar sounds of daily life. Morning coffee at the corner cafe, children running to school, and the soft murmur of neighbors greeting one another created a comforting pattern that residents rarely questioned. But one chilly autumn morning a stranger appeared, and with him came an air of mystery that no one could ignore. He first showed up near the market square, a place that was usually crowded with merchants and shoppers exchanging goods and small talk. He walked slowly, carefully, holding a white cane that tapped lightly on the stone pavement. His dark glasses concealed his eyes completely, and his worn jacket seemed a size too large for his frame. People paused, noticing the cautious but deliberate movements he made. Some whispered to one another, curious but careful not to stare. "He must be blind," someone said softly, and the words carried a mixture of sympathy and intrigue. In those first days he mostly kept to himself, moving carefully from place to place. He always seemed polite and gentle, thanking anyone who offered assistance, but he never asked for help himself unless absolutely necessary. There was something in the way he moved, slow but assured, that made people feel he had adapted to his condition in a quiet, almost graceful way. Children were fascinated, sometimes trailing behind him to see where he would go, while adults nodded at his presence, impressed by the dignity he seemed to carry despite his supposed disability. Over time, the townspeople began to notice patterns in his life. He visited the same cafe every morning, ordering the same simple breakfast and a cup of strong coffee. He would always choose a seat near the window, his cane leaning against the table as if he were waiting for something or someone. Shopkeepers recognized him and offered small greetings, always treating him with extra care. "How are you today?" one woman would ask as she handed him his change. He would smile softly, a gesture that seemed small but held a quiet warmth, and reply in a calm voice, "Thank you, I'm well." Though he shared little about himself, he was not entirely invisible. Conversations in the town square slowly revealed bits and pieces about him. People speculated about his past. Some thought he had been hurt in an accident. Others imagined he had lost his sight from illness. No one knew for sure, and he never contradicted them. He allowed the rumors to float, never correcting anyone, never revealing too much. He had learned, it seemed, that people preferred their own stories about others to the truth, and he quietly let them believe whatever they wanted. Children were both intrigued and unafraid. One little boy often walked beside him, curious about how someone could live without seeing. The man would speak softly to him, answering questions with patience and gentle humor. He never made the boy feel foolish for asking, nor did he reveal the slightest hint that he might not be as he appeared. In these moments, he seemed almost like a guardian figure quietly guiding, always aware of the world around him in ways that went unnoticed by most. Despite his outward calm, there was an air of tension that few could detect. Occasionally his hands would tighten around his cane, and he would pause as though listening for something others could not hear. He avoided certain streets, turned down alleys without explanation, and sometimes lingered in one place longer than seemed necessary. People noticed these quirks but rarely questioned them. It was easier, after all, to assume that these were the behaviors of someone living with blindness, rather than something more complicated. Months passed, and he became part of the town's quiet scenery. Shopkeepers knew his usual orders. The cafe staff recognized his daily table, and neighbors would nod as they passed him on the street. He had become a familiar figure, someone whose presence was almost comforting in its consistency. Yet behind the dark glasses and careful steps he watched, observed, and absorbed every detail. No movement went unnoticed, no conversation unheard. It was as if he had become a part of the town while remaining entirely apart from it, a silent observer in a world that assumed he could not see. The townspeople began to trust him, confiding in him, offering small kindnesses that came naturally in a close-knit community. One woman offered him homemade bread, leaving it at the cafe for him to pick up, and he accepted it with quiet gratitude. A retired man shared stories of his youth, expecting only a polite nod in return. But the man would listen attentively, occasionally commenting with insight that surprised those around him. Even though he claimed blindness, his understanding of people seemed deeper than most. There were subtle moments that made a few people wonder if perhaps his blindness was not as complete as he let on. A shopkeeper once caught him noticing a small scratch on the counter as he entered. or a child remarked that he seemed to know when someone was standing behind him before they spoke. These moments were fleeting and easily explained away. Most people dismissed them with a shrug, unwilling to challenge what they assumed to be true. It was easier to believe in his story than to question it, and he relied on that simplicity to navigate his carefully constructed life. He also found ways to work quietly within the community, taking small jobs that allowed him to earn money without drawing too much attention. He mended shoes, fixed minor household items, and occasionally helped deliver groceries. People assumed he had learned these skills before losing his sight, and they marveled at his resourcefulness. Yet no one realized how calculated his every action was, how carefully he measured risk, and how he had crafted a life that allowed him to blend in while remaining safe. As the seasons changed, so did the town. Leaves turned golden in autumn, snow blanketed the streets in winter, and flowers bloomed in spring. Through it all he remained, a steady presence, never rushing, never faltering, never revealing the depths of his awareness. Neighbors began to forget that he was a stranger, welcoming him as if he had always been part of the town's fabric. They offered invitations to gatherings, asked for his opinions on small matters, and included him in conversations, treating him as one of their own. Still, there was a careful distance he maintained. He never lingered too long in one home, never allowed anyone to glimpse documents or objects he carried, and never spoke of family or past life. When asked personal questions, he smiled politely, changing the topic or answering vaguely. He had learned long ago that too much curiosity could be dangerous, and he had perfected the art of appearing open while remaining untouchable. It was a delicate balance, and one he maintained with skill honed over years. Even in social settings, he remained attentive and composed. At a town meeting, he would sit quietly, listening to debates, occasionally nodding or asking a thoughtful question that seemed to come from intuition rather than sight. People admired his insight, assuming it came from experience with blindness, never realizing that his perception went far beyond what was visible to the eye. His patience and subtlety made him both respected and intriguing, though no one suspected the true reason behind his careful demeanor. In the evenings, he would walk alone along the quiet streets, the sounds of the town settling into night surrounding him, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant barking of dogs, and the occasional laughter of children carried faintly through the air. He walked with confidence, yet his pace was measured, each step deliberate. There was a rhythm to his movements, a silent communication with the world around him that only he fully understood. He seemed both part of the town and entirely apart from it, a man living among others yet keeping a world of secrets to himself. Even after months, people still felt a mixture of admiration and mystery toward him. He had woven himself into the town's daily life, earning trust and respect without revealing more than necessary. His presence was comforting yet enigmatic, a figure who inspired both curiosity and empathy. People spoke of him in hushed tones, sharing small stories and speculations, yet no one truly knew him. He had become a living paradox, someone fully present yet seemingly detached, a stranger who had quietly made a home in their midst without anyone understanding how or why. Through all of this, he never lost sight of his purpose. Every action, every interaction was part of a larger plan that only he understood. He listened, remembered, and adapted, always calculating risk, always remaining a step ahead of anyone who might inadvertently uncover the truth. His life was a delicate balance of appearances and reality, a performance maintained with precision over months and years. Yet beneath the surface there was more than caution. There was a story waiting to unfold, a past hidden and a future uncertain, and a truth that would one day shock everyone who thought they knew him. And so life continued in the small town. People went about their days, occasionally glancing at the man with the dark glasses and white cane, offering kindness and receiving polite smiles in return. They never suspected the complexity behind his quiet presence, the careful observation, and the secrets he carried. To them, he was a blind man, navigating the world with courage and grace. But in reality, he was far more than that. He was a survivor, a strategist, a man whose past had taught him lessons that no ordinary life could teach, and whose future was poised on the edge of revelation. And for now he remained, walking the streets, engaging politely with neighbors, observing quietly, and living a life that seemed ordinary only on the surface. But beneath the calm exterior, a story was unfolding, one that would eventually shake the town to its core. one that would challenge every assumption and reveal the extraordinary lengths a person might go to survive. Life, in the small town, had slowly grown accustomed to the presence of the man who everyone believed was blind. By now, months had turned into years, and he had carved out a quiet place for himself among the residents. People greeted him warmly, assuming they were helping someone who lived with challenges they could only imagine. He had become a figure of respect and admiration, a symbol of patience and quiet strength. Yet beneath the calm surface, the world around him continued to unfold in ways that only he truly understood. Every day, he followed the routines he had set for himself. He would wake early before the town stirred, and walk along the narrow streets feeling the textures of the pavement beneath his feet. The tapping of his white cane was both guidance and ritual, a sound that seemed familiar to the sleeping town. Shopkeepers would open their doors. Children would rush past him on their way to school, and the smell of bread from the local bakery would reach him even before he turned the corner. He could sense every movement, every sound, every subtle change in the environment, and he used this awareness to navigate his world with remarkable ease. Despite the town's assumption that he was blind, he had discovered ways to remain engaged without revealing his secret. He learned the habits and routines of everyone around him, the rhythm of the baker slicing bread, the pattern of footsteps of the schoolchildren, the tone of voice each neighbor used when speaking. By observing through sound and subtle signs, he could predict what was happening around him without ever needing to see it. This skill made him appear capable and patient, but it also kept him safe. He had mastered the art of blending in completely, while remaining fully aware of everything. He took pride in the small ways he contributed to the town. Occasionally, he would help neighbors carry heavy packages or offer directions when someone was lost. People trusted him implicitly, believing his limitations were genuine and that any assistance he offered was an extraordinary effort. Yet behind his calm demeanor there was always calculation. He moved carefully, never overstepping boundaries, always ensuring that he remained part of the town without revealing the depth of his perception. His life was a balance between connection and invisibility, and he had become an expert at maintaining it. One of the most remarkable things about him was how he earned the trust of children. They were naturally curious, and unlike adults, they did not automatically filter their observations through societal assumptions. One child in particular seemed fascinated by him, always asking questions about how he navigated the world. The man answered patiently, never giving away the truth but offering enough insight to keep the child engaged. They would walk together for blocks, the child asking about sounds and smells and the man guiding them through careful explanations. He became a quiet mentor figure, teaching without seeming to teach, and the child admired him without ever fully understanding why. Over time, adults began to see him as a source of wisdom too. Town meetings occasionally included his presence, and he would sit quietly, listening and observing. When he spoke, people noticed the precision and thoughtfulness of his words. He never dominated conversation, never drew unnecessary attention to himself, but when he offered an insight, it carried weight. Neighbors assumed that his perspective came from the unique experience of living with blindness, unaware that his understanding of the world was far more comprehensive than anyone could imagine. He had learned to read people as easily as he read sounds and patterns, understanding emotions and intentions in ways that were almost intuitive. Even daily chores became a display of his skill. He could navigate the market, choosing the ripest fruits, noticing subtle changes in stock, and handling money with precision. Shopkeepers marveled at his accuracy, assuming he had trained himself through sheer determination. What they did not know was that he had been silently observing for years, memorizing details, calculating distances, and learning the habits of everyone he encountered. His life had become a careful blend of observation, patience, and subtle action. Every step was deliberate, every decision thoughtful. He had turned his supposed weakness into a quiet strength that allowed him to thrive without drawing attention. Despite his growing comfort in the town, there were occasional moments of tension. Strangers passing through would sometimes speak louder than necessary or move suddenly, and he would adjust his movements with barely noticeable reflexes. He had developed an acute sense of awareness, noticing shifts in tone, changes in temperature, and even the faintest of scents. These skills were not born out of habit alone. They were a necessity, cultivated over years of avoiding danger and remaining unseen. To anyone else, his life appeared calm and ordinary, but he carried a constant readiness beneath the surface. Social interactions, too, became a delicate dance. People would share stories, ask personal questions, or offer invitations, and he would accept some while declining others. He had learned to maintain just enough distance to keep his life private, while remaining a valued member of the community. This balance required patience and subtlety, but he had mastered it. He could engage fully when needed, withdrawing at the right moment to protect himself. The townspeople saw him as gentle and approachable, never suspecting the careful calculations behind each action. His reputation slowly grew beyond simple curiosity. People admired his perseverance, assumed courage, and patience. Occasionally, the local newspaper would feature a story about him, highlighting how someone living with blindness could navigate the world with such dignity. He accepted the attention gracefully, allowing it to reinforce the perception of him as a model of quiet resilience. Yet even as others celebrated his life, he remained fully aware of the danger of attention, maintaining a careful distance from anyone who might probe too deeply into his past. One winter, a particularly harsh season descended upon the town. Snow covered the streets and winds carried a biting cold that made walking difficult. Still, he moved with ease, navigating icy sidewalks and slippery paths with precision. Neighbors noticed, commenting on how remarkable it was that someone with blindness could manage so well in treacherous conditions. He smiled politely, offering thanks, but internally he was aware that his caution and observation were the true tools that kept him safe. Every step was measured, every sound noted, and every decision weighed. It was a subtle mastery that few could recognize, yet it defined his daily life. There were moments of quiet reflection, too. In the evenings, he would sit in the cafe near the window, listening to the soft murmur of conversation, the clink of cups, and the laughter that floated through the air. He observed without intrusion, learning the rhythms of life, noticing the little gestures people made unconsciously, the way a neighbor always straightened a chair, the way children lined up to leave the school, the subtle changes in tone when someone was anxious or happy. All these details built a complete picture of the world around him. To anyone else, it seemed like ordinary observation. To him, it was survival, knowledge, and connection all at once. Despite the calm exterior he presented, he never forgot why he had come to this town in the first place. There were parts of his past he could never share, dangers he could never reveal, and choices he had made that required secrecy. Pretending to be blind was not just a convenience. It was protection. It allowed him to move through the world unnoticed, to blend into the lives of others, and to avoid scrutiny that could expose him to harm. He had learned that trust was fragile and that appearances could be a shield, and he wielded that shield with care and precision. People in the town began to share small acts of kindness with him, offering warmth in ways that deepened their sense of connection. One neighbor left flowers on his doorstep, another brought fresh bread from the bakery, and yet another invited him to join in community events. He accepted these gestures with quiet gratitude, aware of the goodwill they represented while also recognizing the delicate balance he needed to maintain. Trust had been earned slowly, and he handled it with respect, never betraying the faith of those who believed in him. Children continued to be fascinated by him, often trailing after him to hear his thoughts or to ask questions about how he lived. He responded with patience, using metaphors and explanations that made complex ideas simple. In those moments, he became a teacher without effort, a mentor whose guidance shaped the curiosity and understanding of the next generation. The adults admired these interactions as well, seeing in him a kindness and wisdom that seemed rare in someone living with blindness. They never suspected that his insight came from observation, calculation, and experience rather than actual sight. As the years went by, he became woven into the town's life. People greeted him without hesitation, sought his opinion, and included him in routines that had once been reserved for those without disabilities. His presence was accepted, even valued, and he carried himself with a quiet dignity that inspired respect. Yet the careful reader of behavior might notice small contradictions, subtle signs that something was different. The way he avoided certain obstacles too easily, the way he recognized people before they spoke, the way he handled tasks with precision. These hints went largely unnoticed, but they were clues to the truth that lay beneath the surface. And through it all, he remained patient. He understood the value of time, the importance of maintaining appearances and the subtle power of observation. Life had become a careful performance, one that allowed him to exist fully while remaining hidden in plain sight. He could participate in the world, help where needed, and build connections without ever revealing the depth of his awareness. The town saw a blind man navigating life with courage and skill, but the truth was far more complex. He was a survivor, a strategist, and a man whose silence and patience had become his greatest strengths. Even as trust and admiration grew, he never relaxed completely. Danger was always a quiet presence in the back of his mind, a reminder that life could change in a single moment. He had learned to balance engagement with caution, connection with distance, and kindness with calculation. Each step, each conversation, each gesture was carefully considered, ensuring that he remained safe while still participating fully in the community. And so, his life continued, quiet and deliberate, full of small moments that shaped both his existence and the perception of those around him. People trusted him, admired him, and included him in their lives. Yet beneath the calm exterior lay the careful mind of someone who had learned to survive in a world where one misstep could be fatal. The man who appeared blind had become an integral part of the town, yet he remained a mystery, a silent observer, and a figure whose true story had yet to unfold. The small town had grown used to the man with the dark glasses and white cane. For years he had been a quiet presence, moving carefully through the streets, participating in daily life without ever drawing attention to himself. He had become a figure people trusted, admired, and in many ways relied upon for his calm demeanor and steady presence. But even in a place that seemed so predictable, life has a way of changing, and sometimes those changes begin with the smallest of observations. It started when a new neighbor moved into the town. She was sharp, attentive, and naturally curious. She noticed the rhythms of life more acutely than most and had a habit of observing people without interfering. The first time she saw him, she simply assumed he was blind, just like everyone else. But over the next few days, she began to notice things that did not add up. Small, almost imperceptible details, a gesture, a movement, a reaction that seemed too precise caught her attention. She began to pay closer attention, not wanting to make assumptions, but her instincts told her something was unusual. She watched him walking down the street one morning, his cane tapping lightly against the pavement. As a group of children ran past, she noticed that he shifted his body slightly, anticipating their path before they even reached him. A moment later, he guided a dog out of the way with a gentle hand. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it suggested a level of awareness that she found strange for someone who could not see. Her curiosity was piqued, and over the next few weeks she began observing him more regularly. It was during these observations that she noticed more contradictions. At the market, she saw him select the ripest fruits with care, despite having no apparent way of identifying them visually. He seemed to navigate obstacles with ease, avoiding small cracks, puddles, and uneven pavement that a blind person might stumble over. She did not confront him immediately. Instead, she continued to watch, quietly piecing together patterns that did not match the story everyone else believed. As her observations grew, so did her fascination. She found herself drawn into the mystery of his life, wondering why someone would go to such lengths to appear blind. It was not curiosity for the sake of gossip, it was genuine intrigue. She wanted to understand him, to know the story behind the careful steps, the quiet presence, and the subtle mastery of his surroundings. Each interaction, each gesture became a clue in a puzzle that she was determined to solve. She began speaking to others in the town, casually asking questions about him. People were kind and trusting, offering stories of his courage and resilience. They spoke of how patient he was, how he had adapted to life in ways that inspired them, and how children adored him. No one suspected anything, and most found it hard to believe that someone so seemingly vulnerable could be anything but what they appeared to be. Her questions were met with polite answers, yet she sensed that no one had ever really thought deeply about the inconsistencies she had noticed. Despite this, she did not give up. She started engaging him in conversations more directly, observing his responses and watching for slips or contradictions. She asked seemingly innocent questions about his daily routine, noticing the precision in his answers. She commented on events in town, watching how he reacted to changes that should have been invisible to someone truly blind. His responses were always calm, polite, and carefully measured. He never appeared flustered, never revealed more than was necessary, and he skillfully redirected any conversation that came too close to the truth. The more she observed, the more she realized that he was performing a role with remarkable skill. Every gesture, every step, every interaction seemed intentional, calculated to maintain the illusion. He had created a life in which no one could suspect the truth, and he had mastered it to perfection. Yet, despite the growing evidence, she felt no anger toward him. Instead, she felt a deep sense of respect and wonder. Whoever he was, he had committed to his life with focus and patience that few could match. It was not only his movements that intrigued her, but also the way he engaged with people. He listened attentively, remembered details, and responded in ways that suggested a deep understanding of human behavior. Neighbors shared stories, sought advice, and asked for guidance, and he provided it with quiet wisdom. She noticed that he could predict reactions before they happened, understand emotions before they were expressed, and offer subtle insights that seemed almost uncanny. The more she studied him, the more she realized that his apparent blindness was only one layer of a complex, deliberate life. One afternoon, she observed him at the bakery. A young child had accidentally knocked over a basket of fruit, scattering apples across the floor. She expected him to hesitate, to struggle, or to be unaware of the situation, but he moved with astonishing precision. In a few seconds, the fruit was gathered, the child reassured, and the basket upright again. His calm, confident movements left her stunned. It was a small incident, but it reinforced her suspicion. He was far more aware than anyone realized. Her curiosity eventually led her to follow him more deliberately. She shadowed his walks through the town, noting how he avoided obstacles, navigated narrow pathways, and responded to changes in the environment. Each observation confirmed what she had suspected for weeks. He was not blind, or at least not entirely so. He was living with a secret that gave him an advantage, and he had honed his ability to conceal it with extraordinary skill. Despite her growing knowledge, she remained cautious. She did not confront him directly, understanding that revelation could be dangerous or unwelcome. Instead, she continued to gather details, observing quietly and silently, always aware that her presence might be noticed. She learned to interpret his subtle signals, the slight turn of his head, the way he paused, the tone of his voice. Every small detail became part of a larger picture, a map of the life he had carefully constructed. Meanwhile, the townspeople continued to trust him implicitly. They offered him gifts, included him in social events, and relied on his calm presence as a source of stability. He navigated these interactions with grace, never revealing his awareness of their assumptions. Each smile, each word of thanks, each measured step reinforced the image they had of him. To the town, he was a blind man who had overcome adversity and lived with quiet dignity. To her, he was a man of remarkable skill, carefully controlling every aspect of his life while keeping his true self hidden. The tension grew gradually. She began to test the limits of her observations, asking questions that required more than casual knowledge to answer. She spoke of events he could not have experienced if he were truly blind, watched how he reacted to visual cues, and listened for hints in his language. Each interaction confirmed her suspicions while also deepening her admiration. He was not deceitful in a careless way. He was deliberate, careful, and entirely intentional in maintaining the life he had created. At the same time, she began to consider why he had chosen to live this way. What circumstances had led him to pretend to be blind for so long? Why had he constructed a life in which observation and secrecy were essential? She realized that understanding the answers would require more than observation. It would require trust, patience, and the courage to face a truth that might be difficult to accept. Yet her desire to understand only grew stronger, fueled by a mixture of fascination, respect, and genuine concern. As weeks turned into months, her observations became more refined. She noted how he interacted with neighbors, how he navigated changing weather, how he responded to emergencies, and how he managed social situations. Each detail was meticulously recorded in her mind, forming a picture that was both extraordinary and unsettling. She began to see him not as a blind man, but as someone living with extraordinary awareness, skill, and strategy. His life was a performance, a careful orchestration that allowed him to exist in plain sight while remaining untouchable. Despite her growing understanding, she remained careful. She did not reveal her suspicions to anyone, fearing that premature exposure could lead to misunderstanding or harm. Instead, she continued to watch, to observe, and to piece together the puzzle of his life. Each encounter, each interaction, each small observation added to the story she was constructing in her mind. She began to appreciate the depth of his patience, the intelligence required to maintain such a life, and the subtle courage it took to navigate the world under a carefully crafted illusion. One day, an incident occurred that reinforced the complexity of his life. A delivery truck accidentally blocked a narrow street, forcing pedestrians to navigate carefully around it. She watched as he approached, calmly maneuvered past the obstacle, and helped a small child safely around the corner. His movements were deliberate, precise, and careful. There was no hesitation, no error, no sign of surprise. Observing this, she realized that his skill was not just physical. It was a combination of experience, awareness, and mental preparation. He had lived this life for a long time, mastering every nuance of human and environmental behavior. By now, her fascination had become almost personal. She felt a connection to him through observation, admiration, and the shared understanding of subtle human behaviors. She respected the careful life he had built, the patience and skill required, and the quiet intelligence that allowed him to navigate the world unseen. And yet she knew that sooner or later, the truth would need to be faced. The careful balance he had maintained for years could not last forever, and the longer she observed, the more inevitable the revelation seemed. She continued to study him, always careful not to alarm him or interfere with his routines. Her observations were patient and deliberate, reflecting the same respect and caution that had defined his own life. She began to see the broader picture. This was a man who had created a life to protect himself, who had turned secrecy into a skill, and who had mastered the art of existing unnoticed in a world that assumed visibility was everything. Even as she pieced together these truths, she felt no resentment. There was admiration, curiosity, and a desire to understand, but not judgment. She realized that the decisions he had made, the precautions he had taken, and the life he had constructed were born of necessity. He had survived, adapted, and thrived in ways that few could comprehend, and she began to feel a quiet awe for the life he had carefully orchestrated. And so, the days passed. She continued to observe, to learn, and to respect the careful life he had built. The town went on around them, unaware of the growing awareness of one of its residents. The man remained a quiet, steady presence, navigating life with precision, patience, and skill. Yet beneath the calm exterior, the tension of truth lingered, waiting for the moment when observation, curiosity, and courage would finally converge, and the story that had been hidden for so long would begin to unfold. Life in the small town continued as it always had, with its quiet rhythm and familiar patterns. The man with the dark glasses and white cane remained a steady presence, moving carefully through the streets, interacting politely with neighbors, and carrying himself with the calm patience that had long defined him. For nearly a decade he had lived in this way, blending into the town while maintaining the secret that had allowed him to survive. But all things, no matter how carefully maintained, have a way of coming to light, and the time for revelation was approaching. It began on a crisp spring morning when the curious new neighbor decided to approach him directly. She had watched him for months, piecing together subtle inconsistencies and small contradictions in his behavior. She admired his skill, his patience, and his careful orchestration of life. But her curiosity had grown too strong to ignore. This morning she decided to ask questions that went beyond casual observation. She approached him near the cafe, her steps deliberate, her voice steady. "May I ask you something?" she said softly, careful not to startle him. He paused, his head tilting slightly in acknowledgement. "I've noticed some things about how you move, how you interact with the world. I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you truly blind?" For a moment he remained silent. There was no sign of fear or anger, only the faintest tension in the way he held his cane. He considered her words carefully, weighing the consequences of every response. For years he had maintained his secret, carefully navigating a world where knowledge of his true abilities could have put him at risk. And yet, here was someone who had seen through the surface, whose persistence and intelligence had earned his attention. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of years of secrecy. "I am not blind," he said simply. The words were quiet, almost understated, but they carried a gravity that made the moment feel profound. "I have lived as someone who appears blind for many years. There is a reason for this, a reason that I cannot share with everyone. But now you know the truth." Her eyes widened, a mixture of shock and curiosity reflecting in them. She did not speak immediately, sensing that the story he was about to tell required patience and respect. He motioned for her to sit with him on a nearby bench, the spring air carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Slowly, he began to share the story that had remained hidden for nearly 10 years. He spoke of a life once lived in another city, of dangers that forced him into secrecy, and of decisions that had been necessary for survival. He explained that he had witnessed something dangerous, something that could have put him at risk if he were recognized. Pretending to be blind had allowed him to move through the world unnoticed, to remain safe, and to avoid scrutiny from those who might have wished him harm. It was not a choice made lightly, he said, but one dictated by circumstance, fear, and the instinct to survive. As he spoke, she listened intently, absorbing every detail. She noticed the quiet tension in his voice when he recounted moments of fear, the way his hands tightened briefly before relaxing, and the subtle pauses that marked memories too heavy to carry lightly. It became clear that this was not a story of deceit for personal gain or mischief. It was a story of necessity, courage, and survival. He had lived a life carefully constructed to protect himself, and every step, every gesture, every lie he had told was a measure taken to stay alive. The realization hit her with a mix of awe and empathy. She understood in a way that few others could the complexity of his decisions. She saw the courage it took to maintain such a life, the patience required to navigate every interaction, and the intelligence that allowed him to remain unnoticed for so long. It was not merely a performance, it was a strategy, a lifeline, and a testament to his resilience. News of the revelation did not come immediately to the town. For a while it remained a private story between the two of them, a bond formed through shared understanding. But as stories tend to do in small towns, the truth eventually began to surface. Small hints, shared conversations, and subtle acknowledgments led neighbors to realize that the man they had trusted for years was not as he had appeared. Reactions were mixed. Some felt betrayal, others admiration, and some struggled to reconcile their perceptions with reality. One neighbor, a shopkeeper who had known him for years, admitted feeling conflicted. "I don't know whether to feel angry or amazed," he said quietly. "He lived here among us, trusted and admired, all while keeping this secret. It's remarkable in a way." Others shared similar sentiments, recognizing the careful balance he had maintained and the extraordinary circumstances that had necessitated it. Even those who felt hurt could not ignore the courage and skill it had taken to live this life for so long. As the days passed, the man began to navigate the aftermath of the revelation. Some neighbors approached him with questions, seeking to understand why he had done what he did, while others kept their distance, unsure of how to respond to a truth that challenged their assumptions. He remained calm, patient, and polite, answering questions when necessary but never allowing judgment or hostility to affect him. His experience had taught him that patience, composure, and careful communication were essential in managing human reactions. Children, too, were curious. They asked questions in their straightforward, honest way, and he answered with gentle explanations. He spoke of survival, of decisions made under pressure, and of the importance of understanding circumstances before passing judgment. His words carried lessons beyond his story, teaching the children and even adults about resilience, courage, and the complexity of human life. The local newspaper eventually featured a story, highlighting the revelation and exploring the man's past. The headline was cautious but compelling, hinting at the extraordinary nature of his experience. Readers learned that the man they had assumed was blind had lived under this guise to protect himself from dangers unknown. The story inspired conversations, reflections, and debates throughout the town. People discussed the ethics of deception, the necessity of survival, and the remarkable patience it took to live a life in plain sight while remaining unseen. In the weeks that followed, the man began to reintegrate into the town in a new way. He no longer relied on the pretense of blindness, but he carried himself with the same quiet dignity and careful observation that had defined him for years. People adjusted their perception of him, learning to see beyond the surface, to understand the person he truly was, and to appreciate the extraordinary life he had navigated. Trust, once shaken, slowly rebuilt itself as neighbors recognized the courage and necessity behind his choices. His story left a lasting impact. Conversations shifted from assumptions about appearances to deeper understanding about the human experience. People began to reflect on their own judgments, realizing how often they relied on superficial observations rather than seeking understanding. The man, who had once lived as a hidden figure among them, became a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and the lengths one might go to survive. Even as life returned to a new kind of normal, he remained cautious. He knew that some secrets must remain, that not all questions could be answered, and that safety and discretion were still essential. Yet he also began to share more of himself, carefully, selectively, and with those he trusted. He found that connection, honesty, and understanding could coexist with caution, and he gradually allowed himself to experience a level of freedom he had not known in years. For the first time in a decade, he felt a sense of relief, a lightness that came from revealing the truth to someone who had earned his trust. It was not a relief of recklessness, but of recognition, the recognition that his life, though extraordinary in its secrecy, could now be understood and respected for what it truly was. The experience strengthened his appreciation for human kindness, patience, and empathy, and he began to engage more openly with the town, while still maintaining the careful awareness that had always protected him. He also found new opportunities for connection and contribution. He helped neighbors with tasks that required skill and knowledge, shared stories that taught valuable lessons, and offered guidance to those navigating their own challenges. His presence became a source of insight, understanding, and quiet leadership. People learned not only about his past but also about resilience, patience, and the complexity of life's challenges. As weeks turned into months, the story of the man who had pretended to be blind became part of the town's collective memory. Children who had once trailed behind him on streets now recounted his story to friends, sharing lessons about courage and survival. Adults discussed his life over coffee and in markets, reflecting on the importance of observation, empathy, and understanding. The man himself continued to live quietly, but he did so now with the recognition and respect that had long been earned through years of careful action and deliberate life choices. Through it all, he remained thoughtful, measured, and patient. He had revealed enough to satisfy curiosity while maintaining boundaries necessary for safety. He had survived a decade under a guise that allowed him to navigate danger, and had emerged with his dignity intact. The town, once unaware of the truth, now viewed him with a mixture of admiration, respect, and fascination. They realized that appearances are often deceiving, and that courage, skill, and resilience are sometimes hidden behind the quietest of exteriors. And so the man continued his life, no longer bound by the pretense of blindness, but still guided by the careful awareness and observation that had always defined him. His story became a lesson for the town, a story of survival, intelligence, and patience that challenged assumptions and inspired reflection. For him, the revelation marked not the end of his journey, but a new chapter, a life where truth and discretion coexisted, where connection and safety balanced, and where the extraordinary complexity of human life was acknowledged, respected, and understood. After the revelation of his secret, the town felt a shift. For many, it was a moment of disbelief, followed by reflection and then gradually understanding. The man who had lived among them as someone blind for nearly a decade was no longer a mystery, but he remained the same quiet, patient, and observant figure who had always been part of their daily lives. The way people looked at him had changed, some with admiration, some with curiosity, and some with a sense of cautious respect. Life, however, slowly returned to its usual rhythm, now layered with the knowledge of what had been hidden for so long. He continued his daily walks through the town, though the steps were different now. He no longer needed the white cane or the dark glasses, but he carried himself with the same careful awareness that had always defined him. Neighbors waved as they had for years, some hesitantly at first, unsure how to address someone whose life they had misjudged for so long. Children ran past, shouting greetings with innocent enthusiasm, oblivious to the complexities of the truth he carried. And in these moments he felt a quiet relief that the years of careful observation and patient secrecy could finally give way to a life lived openly, even if the world around him still needed time to adjust. He spent more time engaging with the townspeople in ways he had previously avoided. At the market, he spoke with shopkeepers openly, asking questions and offering help, no longer needing to hide behind pretense. He shared small stories from his past, carefully chosen, hinting at the challenges he had faced without revealing details that could compromise his safety. People listened with fascination and growing respect. They began to understand that his life had been one of survival, careful planning, and extraordinary patience. What had once seemed like deceit now appeared as courage, a testament to the strength required to navigate a world filled with danger. His interactions with neighbors became warmer, more personal. People approached him with a mixture of curiosity and admiration, asking about his past, his thoughts, and his experiences. He answered with honesty, while still preserving the boundaries necessary for his safety. The town slowly began to see him not just as a man who had pretended to be blind, but as someone who had lived a remarkable life under extraordinary circumstances. Respect and trust, once shaken, were gradually rebuilt, and he found that connection and understanding were possible even after years of careful concealment. Children, who had long admired him from a distance, now had a chance to engage with him in ways they never could before. They asked him questions about the world, about life, and about how he had managed to live unnoticed for so long. He spoke to them patiently, explaining the importance of observation, patience, and awareness. He taught lessons not through authority, but through stories and examples showing how intelligence, courage, and careful thought could navigate challenges in ways that appearances alone could never convey. The man also began to offer guidance to adults, quietly advising on matters that required thoughtfulness, discretion, or insight. People sought his opinion not out of obligation, but because they recognized the wisdom his life had afforded him. His experiences had given him an understanding of human nature, risk, and decision-making that few could match. The town gradually realized that his years of careful observation, patient disguise, and deliberate action had equipped him with a perspective that was both rare and valuable. Despite the respect and curiosity he now faced, he remained cautious. He understood that some parts of his life were private, and that safety still required discretion. He chose carefully what to reveal and what to keep to himself. This balance allowed him to connect with others while still preserving the autonomy and security that had been essential for his survival. His presence became a quiet reminder to the town that trust, patience, and respect were earned not only through appearances but through action and character. The man also began to embrace new opportunities that had been impossible before. He helped neighbors with projects that required skill, offering guidance on building, repairing, and problem-solving. People welcomed his assistance, often surprised by the depth of his knowledge and his ability to manage situations with calm precision. What had once seemed like simple kindness now revealed a life shaped by experience, strategy, and careful attention to detail. His contributions were no longer seen as extraordinary because of perceived limitations, but as part of the remarkable person he truly was. Even as he engaged more fully with the community, he found moments for reflection. He walked alone through quiet streets, observing the world with a newfound freedom. He could see the colors of flowers, the texture of bricks, the faces of children laughing in the sunlight. These were ordinary things to most, but for him they carried a new significance. A reminder that life could be lived openly after so many years of careful concealment. He appreciated the beauty of the world in a way that few could understand, having learned to value subtlety, patience, and awareness above all else. His story also became a lesson for the town in empathy and understanding. People began to recognize how often they judged others by appearances, assumptions, or incomplete information. Conversations shifted from casual gossip to thoughtful discussions about resilience, courage, and the human capacity to survive extraordinary circumstances. The man who had once moved unnoticed among them now inspired reflection and deeper understanding about the lives of others and the hidden struggles that often remain unseen. He also began to nurture relationships with neighbors who had shown curiosity, respect, and patience throughout the years. They became confidants, companions, and friends. He shared more of his experiences with them, illustrating how choices, observation, and patience could shape life in ways that seemed impossible at first glance. These connections, built on mutual understanding, trust, and admiration, became a source of comfort and belonging. He realized that after years of careful secrecy, genuine connection was not only possible but deeply rewarding. Even challenges were met with a sense of calm determination. Occasionally, misunderstandings arose. Neighbors who struggled to reconcile their assumptions with the truth, or visitors who questioned why he had pretended for so long. He handled these moments with patience, offering explanation when necessary, listening attentively and never allowing frustration to disrupt the careful balance he had created. His life had taught him that conflict could be managed through composure, clarity, and understanding, and he applied these lessons in every interaction. Over time, the town came to accept him fully, not just as the man who had once pretended to be blind, but as a person of extraordinary resilience, intelligence, and quiet courage. Children grew up hearing his story, inspired by the way he had navigated life under difficult circumstances. Adults learned to appreciate the complexity of human experience, recognizing that appearances could be deceiving, and that patience, observation, and careful thought were invaluable skills. The man became a symbol, not of deceit but of endurance, ingenuity, and the ability to survive while maintaining integrity. He also began to reflect on his own life with a sense of accomplishment. The years of careful observation, deliberate action, and patient secrecy had been difficult, sometimes lonely, but they had shaped him into a person capable of extraordinary understanding and empathy. He could see the world with clarity, not only through vision but through experience, attention, and awareness. He had lived a life that many could not imagine, and yet he emerged not bitter or regretful but thoughtful, composed, and ready to embrace the new opportunities that openness allowed. His presence became a source of quiet inspiration. Neighbors sought his advice, children listened eagerly to his stories, and the town gradually recognized the depth of his contributions. His story was told and retold, not as a tale of deception, but as a narrative of survival, patience, and the extraordinary measures one might take to navigate danger. People came to understand that courage is not always visible, that intelligence can be hidden behind calm exteriors, and that resilience often manifests in subtle, deliberate ways. As life settled into this new rhythm, he found moments of quiet satisfaction. He could now engage with the world openly, build relationships without pretense, and share his experiences in ways that educated, inspired, and connected. Yet he remained careful, preserving boundaries that ensured both his safety and his peace of mind. The balance he had maintained for years now took on a new form, blending openness with discretion, freedom with mindfulness, and connection with awareness. Even simple days carried significance. He would walk through the town square, noticing the laughter of children, the bustle of markets, and the warmth of neighborly greetings. Every detail was appreciated, every gesture observed, and every interaction handled with thoughtfulness. Life, once constrained by necessity, now held possibilities that had previously seemed unreachable. He could participate fully, share his wisdom, and contribute in meaningful ways, while still honoring the lessons of caution and awareness that had carried him through the past decade. And so, the man who had lived as someone blind for 10 years finally embraced a life of honesty, connection, and understanding. The town, once unaware of his true abilities, came to admire him not for what they had assumed, but for the extraordinary person he truly was. His life became a story of survival, patience, courage, and the quiet power of observation. The lessons he carried, both in action and in story, left a lasting impact on everyone who encountered him, shaping their understanding of resilience, empathy, and the remarkable complexity of human life. In the end, he continued to walk through the streets of the small town, calm, patient, and observant, but now fully seen. Children waved, neighbors smiled, and visitors listened with curiosity and respect. His story was no longer a secret, yet it remained extraordinary, a testament to the human capacity to endure, adapt, and thrive. And in the quiet moments when he paused to feel the sun on his face or listen to the soft sounds of the town, he allowed himself a small, quiet smile, knowing that he had survived, that he had lived fully, and that the life he had carefully constructed had led him to a place of understanding, connection, and peace.